This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China and the EU agree the war in Ukraine is threatening global security and the global economy. The two sides meet at a virtual China-EU summit.
Our other headlines: Moscow says Ukraine hit a fuel depot in Russia. Ukraine says it cannot confirm or deny those claims.
Russia keeps the gas flowing to Europe despite a Moscow ultimatum to pay in rubles or be cut off.
What I decided was my main mission, to understand China and how it works.
And the people who brought two countries closer together, 50 years of China-UK diplomatic relations.
China and the EU have agreed the war in Ukraine is threatening global security and the world's economy. The two sides have been holding a virtual summit, the first such meeting in 2 years, with Russia's attack on Ukraine top of the agenda.
Brussels was seeking assurances that China would not assist Russia evade economic sanctions, but China says it would push for peace in its own way. Our correspondent Swen Tianyuan reports.
A range of issues have been discussed at the meeting today, and the Ukraine crisis is one of the most anticipated topics on the agenda of the China-EU leaders meeting. The two sides have taken this high-level meeting to address the issue in order to help restore peace in the region as soon as possible. And Chinese President Xi Jinping called for joint efforts between China and the EU to bring peace and stability to the turbulent world. The president said this about 2 hours ago during his virtual meeting with the EU leaders, and he pointed out that the two sides should play a constructive role in resolving the issue. Besides that, Xi also noted that the EU should have strategic independence and maintain consistency in its policies toward China. And earlier today, Premier Li Keqiang had a similar meeting with European diplomats and discussed issues such as energy and food security, as well as trade and cooperation. And Li said China would boost mutual understanding and strengthen communication with Europe to deepen pragmatic cooperation and tackle global challenges.
Swen Tianyuan reporting from Beijing. Well, let's get the European perspective now from Dan Ashby in Brussels. Dan, what is the EU saying about this summit?
Well, Robin, this conflict may have brought the contours of power into stark relief, but today was about two superpowers trying to bring the world back towards peace. The EU came here with war in Europe, with the biggest refugee crisis in generations, and came with a singular focus to try to press China to do more to stop Russia, to make President Putin bring his troops out of Ukraine and not to undermine Western sanctions. China, though, says that it wants peace in its own way too, and that it wants to see more people being level-headed and a world that's gone beyond Cold War mentality. They both say they want peace and stability for the world, but when it came to the particular solutions to that, they at times felt worlds apart.
The EU called it a wartime summit over a conflict that they say has become a defining moment for the world. In their first major talk since the conflict began, the Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and the EU pressed China to do more to stop Russia.
China cannot turn a blind eye to Russia's violation of international law, and these principles are enshrined in the UN Charter and principles sacred to China.
The EU wants China to put pressure on Russia to withdraw its troops and for Beijing to support Western sanctions. But China is a strategic partner of Russia and has rejected Western sanctions on principle in the past. Instead, it came with its own points, saying that China has been encouraging peace talks in its own way and has sent supplies to European countries receiving refugees. It wants to see an end to the Cold War mentality and supports dialogue between NATO and Russia. But though both sides say they want peace, there was no agreement on the best route to it. The only common ground was the gravity of the moment.
It was clear that this is not only a defining moment for our continent. but it is also a defining moment for our relationship with the rest of the world.
As expected, there were no agreements and no joint statement. But both the EU and China will be crucial in deciding what happens to Ukraine.
And interestingly, Europe has come to this saying that, look, the EU imports billions of dollars of Chinese goods. It's a lucrative market. And if China wants to maximize the benefits of that, then they have to find solutions together to problems like Ukraine. China saying, though, that it is supporting peace in its own way. They want to continue dialogue. Both sides said that, and both sides said time and again they are committed to peace and stability. But as we found so many times in these intractable conflicts, saying that both sides want peace and finding a way to bring that about are sometimes two very different things.
Dan, thanks very much. Dan Ashby there in Brussels.
Well, Isabel Hilton is the founder and senior advisor of China Dialogue, and here's her analysis on that summit and China-EU relations.
Relations between the EU and China are at the lowest point that I can remember. This was primarily intended to be a summit in which relations could be restored after a rocky couple of years over other issues. However, the war in Ukraine has simply knocked that on the head, and it's good to keep talking, but I can't see that very much has come out of today.
Is the EU united on what it wants out of China?
I think the EU is pretty united in the hope that China could use its enormous influence with Russia to stop the killing. I mean, the difficulty that the EU has is that this is a war in Europe, and that every day, thousands of traumatized families are crossing the borders and being taken into other countries in Europe, into people's homes. People are extremely moved and distressed by this because it's very, it's there every day. So there is no political space for another position beyond wishing to stop the war. And even if it is only that China could persuade Russia to cease fire, that would be an important step forward. And I think there's genuine puzzlement as to why China has not used its influence to date.
We're watching the press conference, of course, and the public pronouncements. How much of these events then turn into a private diplomatic narrative that perhaps can be more productive in ensuing days?
Well, there always is, of course, the back-channel conversation, the bits we don't see. And in the press conferences, each side is speaking to its domestic opinion as well as to world opinion. So it is to be hoped that some language can be found that can move this forward, and that China, perhaps might find a way to exert pressure on Russia without appearing to breach its limitless friendship arrangements. Because again, I think the European position would be that if you are really a friend of a country, you do try to stop it making mistakes or causing suffering, and that in that spirit of friendship that perhaps Russia could be moved to act.
China, like Western economies, is losing badly while Ukraine is involved in this invasion, though, isn't it?
Well, it is losing, yes. I think it stands to lose rather more. I mean, as you know, China had 6,000 Chinese citizens. It had contracts for infrastructure, and Ukraine, it had a strategic partnership with Ukraine, which Xi Jinping himself had signed, which guaranteed protection to Ukraine in the event of a nuclear attack. So it was a close relationship. And I think that it's sad to see the relationship so damaged by this. I think there is a bigger risk, however, that if we don't know how this is going to end, but it is clearly going to be, it's one of those moments which is going to reshape world affairs. And as several European officials pointed out, China's trade with Europe is much, much larger than its trade with Russia. And if things really do go sour, then I think that is also at risk. Not all of it, of course. But, good trade depends on good relations.
Moscow says a missile strike on an oil depot inside Russian territory, which it blames on Ukraine, has damaged peace talks between the two countries. 2 missiles hit the facility in the city of Belgorod, 35 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, early on Friday, injuring 2 workers.
Well, Ukraine has so far neither confirmed nor denied the claims from Moscow. Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba says Kiev doesn't have full military information about what happened. So let's talk now to our correspondents Yolo Abdavid in Kyiv and Stuart Smith in Moscow. Yolo first, tell us more about what we know of this attack in Belgorod and the situation in Kyiv now.
We do know that an oil depot in Belgorod, in Russian territory, that it was hit twice. They believe that there were 2 helicopters that carried out the attack, and it was an oil depot, very similar to an attack that happened in Lviv a few days ago, last Saturday. And the accusation immediately was that it was the Ukrainian military that took part in this attack, even though it was inside Russian territory. Now, if that is the case, it would be significant indeed. It would have been the first attack outside Ukraine on Russia. Now, they haven't confirmed it, the Ukrainian military, and they haven't denied it either. And the reason why many news agencies are carrying the possibilities of the Ukrainian being behind this attack is because that the 2 helicopters that were used flew at low altitude, and it's a trait that the Ukrainians have used before in the Donbass region when they've been fighting separatist forces there. And that's why the finger of suspicion is pointing towards the Ukrainians. But the military here, despite a press conference earlier this afternoon, they're not confirming it. And in terms of Kyiv, we're told, and we can hear some gunfire and some muffled explosions this afternoon, and that's to the north of Kyiv. It seems as if Russian troops are pulling back, and there are unconfirmed reports that that is the case from people living in those areas.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, what exactly has the Kremlin had to say about this attack Yolo was mentioning on the oil depot?
Russian spokesperson Dmitry Peskov focused on the domestic response. He said that everything is being done possible to reorganize the supply chain and avoid disruption to the region. The Ministry of Defense here in Russia hasn't actually commented on the event. All of the information we've been getting here in Russia has come from a governor in the region, and he says that now the fires at the oil depot have been extinguished. It took hundreds of firefighters and 100 pieces of equipment delivered by helicopter and rail to achieve that, and he said nobody was hurt, despite initial reports that some people were injured. He said only windows and power lines were destroyed. Commenting on the lack of reaction by the authorities in Moscow, he said that there is an investigation underway and there will be a press conference eventually to decide, to declare exactly what happened during this. There hasn't been the same kind of the response you might expect from the first incursion of a foreign power in Russia since the end of World War II. It's been quite muted, and that, the Belgorod governor says, is due to the investigation ongoing.
And Yolo, I want to come back to you and ask you about the bus convoy that's attempting to reach Mariupol. What more do we know about what's happened? There are unconfirmed reports of aid supplies being looted.
Equally confusing, I think, Robin, because we've been talking about Mariupol and the plight of the people who are still trapped there for so many days now, and they have been under bombardment in some areas of that city for several weeks. So we know that there are between 100 and 160, 70,000 people who are in need of humanitarian aid. There's been no water, no power, no food, no medicines going into that city for 36 days. So there is a real need, and the International Red Cross, with other aid charities, have been trying to get aid into the city. There were supposedly a convoy of more than 50 buses heading down there as well. There's no confirmation that it's arrived, and there are rumours and stories that have been carried by some news agencies that some aid has been stolen, has been looted en route down to Mariupol. We know there are still Ukrainian soldiers in part of the city, inside Mariupol, but of course they are surrounded by Russian forces. So there is confusion about what's happened to the buses that are supposed to carry at least 2,000 to 3,000 people away from Mariupol, and there's also confusion whether indeed some aid has been stolen as it's heading down there towards the southern city.
And returning to you, Stuart Smith, today is the deadline for Europe to start paying its Russian gas bills in rubles. How's that looking?
That's right. So far, there's been no disruption to the gas supply situation, and the Kremlin explained today that that is because payment for any such deliveries will be taken in the next few weeks, by mid-April going into May. And so at the moment, with the payment for these deliveries coming later, after the delivery has taken place, there is no need for worry at the moment, and that gives time for European governments and for gas importers to try to work out what exactly this new decree means. Some companies say they've been approached by Gazprom, others say they've yet to make contact. In practice, it seems, based on the decree that Russian President Vladimir Putin signed, that this will mean gas importers will be able to pay euros or dollars into a Russian bank account, where it will be converted into rubles and put into a separate account. And then that ruble account, which is still belonging to those importers, will pay the final settlement to the Russian exporter. So allowing, in a way, Russia to say that rubles are being used to make the gas payments, but importers to say that they are paying in euros and dollars. And the key here seems less to be, analysts say, about trying to prop up the ruble with these payments, or even trying to increase leverage on Europe, but the ability now for the Kremlin to say that Gazprom Bank, the bank mandated to receive these payments, cannot be sanctioned, because if it is, that would stop all of these gas exports to Western countries. And so a way, some analysts believe, to try and prevent sanctions being imposed on Gazprom and its bank, Gazprom Bank.
Stuart Smith in Moscow and Yolo Abdaviv in Kyiv. Thank you both very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, why millions of Britons are paying a lot more for their household gas today than they were yesterday.
The British public not only need to know, but they want to know more about China.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China to unlock opportunities between the two countries. They became known as the icebreakers.
East meets West. We're now at a time when we need the icebreaker spirit.
My first impression when I came to China is I noticed the similarities more than the differences.
It's about understanding each other's culture.
We look at the things that bring our nations together.
My dad is Chinese, my mom is English. I grew up in London, but I went to China to work at age 25.
Whenever I've gone to China, it's just been amazingly welcoming.
The music is beautiful language and bring all the people together.
I'm exploring, I'm experimenting, I'm trying something new, all in the hopes to build a bridge. And I think we definitely need more people doing that.
It was only when I got to know my Chinese father in my 40s that I really got to know the other half of myself.
I hope we make it another 50 years, another 500 years.
Meet the bridge builders, the individuals who dared to think beyond the horizon and to open up our world, on TV and online on CGTN.
I hope that you will all become icebreakers and bridge builders.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com, the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Moscow is demanding what it calls unfriendly nations pay for Russian gas imports in Russian rubles. Germany and France have rejected this, despite Europe relying on Russia for around 1/3 of its gas imports.
Germany has already announced it is working to lower its dependence on Russian energy, but can it be done quickly enough? Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports.
Germany is Europe's largest economy because of its heavy industrial production, but that production is driven by Russian oil and gas. the price of which has risen more than fivefold. Now the threat of Russia cutting all supplies to Germany has industrial leaders very worried. Kelheim Fibers is one of the world's biggest producers of viscose fibers. While annual sales reach around $200 million, this year the company expects its gas bill alone to eat up more than half of that.
The impact for us would be enormous. We are energy independent. We don't use any electricity from the grid. Our process is geared towards steam and electricity, which is needed here at the plant. So we are highly efficient, but everything is based on natural gas.
Last year, Russian gas accounted for 55% of Germany's imports, while a third of Europe's overall gas comes from Russia, making it a powerful bargaining chip for President Vladimir Putin to retaliate for Western sanctions. Yet Berlin, along with many other Western nations, has repeated its refusal to pay in rubles and says it is building alternatives.
There's a growing consensus that say we have to accelerate renewable energy. That's the only midterm and long-term solution. In the short term, there will be gas shortfalls that we cannot immediately replace with renewables. And therefore, there's also attempts to diversify, to get additional LNG from Qatar, from Algeria, from the US.
Yet it won't be until mid-2024 that Germany could achieve full independence from Russian supplies, according to Economy Minister Robert Habeck. So Germany has activated the first stage of its emergency gas supply plan, creating a task force to monitor and prepare for the eventuality of a serious gas shortage, while consumers have been asked to cut their usage.
Germany's production industry would be dealt the heaviest blow if Russian gas stopped flowing into Germany. It would also risk a number of jobs. But by law, households, as well as critical infrastructure such as hospitals, would be protected, meaning that things like ventilators, heating, and lights would stay on.
Analysts predict that in the case of a cut, the remaining 50% of energy from other sources and the 25% it has in reserves would be directed to those priority customers, meaning the country's current plans to phase out nuclear and coal energy by the end of this decade are not expected to be affected.
Nuclear is supposed to end at the end of this year, and the operators of these power plants have made their plans accordingly. To continue to run the nuclear power plants would require very serious investments in sort of security upgrades. For coal, it's sort of a 1 to 2 year timeline where we're really facing a potential crisis. It could mean that individual coal power plants will be used more in those 2 years, but it doesn't mean that the timeline for 2030 changes.
While many take comfort from this, many others in Germany remain very concerned.
Without gas, we have to shut this down. That's clear.
Natalie Carney, CGTN, Munich, Germany.
I've been speaking to Tom Marzek-Manzer, head of gas analytics at ICIS, a financial firm that provides specialist information for the gas, power, carbon and coal markets about those arrangements on Russian gas.
So my understanding is that rubles will be required, but two conditions. So one is that the payer, the buyer of the gas, the gas companies in Germany and Italy and France and elsewhere still pay in the original currencies of their actual contracts, which is in euros or dollars. But they have to now specifically pay into a Gazprom bank account, which will then do the conversion to the rubles for them. So ultimately, there is a rubles going into Gazprom's own into their account, having had this conversion done by the Gazprom bank.
And there was this threat, wasn't there, that Russia would turn off the taps of gas. It needs the money, though, doesn't it, that comes from its EU customers. Can it really afford to cut off supplies?
No, that very much would be shooting itself in the foot, to be perfectly honest. You know, ICIS estimates that through March, Gazprom was making something in the region of $330 million per day in gas sales. So yeah, if they turn off those taps, then they're not making that gas. They're not making that money at all. So it really is an important revenue stream for them.
EU governments have said they want to reduce their reliance on Russian energy. What are they doing to make that happen?
Well, they are looking to increase investment and for energy companies to increase investment in alternative sources. A lot of that is in going into increasing import capacity of LNG, liquefied natural gas, so the gas on tankers that can come in from around the world. So we've already seen a number of gas companies and gas infrastructure companies make investments or say they're going to make investments to increase capacity and imports of LNG. The key problem, though, is that actually there's only a finite amount of LNG out there. So it's one thing increasing the capacity and saying the Commission would like more imports of LNG, but China still imports a lot. Japan imports a lot, and so does South Korea. So there is still a competition for the LNG out there, even with this idea in play.
So do you think the EU is going to meet their goals? It said it wants a reduction of 2/3 this year when it comes to reliance on Russian gas. Is that realistic, do you think?
I don't think that's achievable at all, to be honest. Partly for the reasons I've just described, in terms of there's actually not enough LNG globally around to go around, and partly because the contracts of the buyers of the European buyers of Gazprom gas are bound by contract to take that gas, in some cases all the way through to 2035. So they can't suddenly unilaterally stop taking that gas. They would then be in breach of contract if they said, no, we're just not going to take that. So unless that gas is sanctioned, in which case that would make the contracts put the contract under force majeure, the Unipers, the Unionize of Germany and Italy really do need to take a certain large proportion of the gas that they're contracted to take.
So if Russia isn't selling to the EU, where could its other customers be?
It doesn't really have any other major customers, and that's, again, an element of shooting itself in the foot, because if it cuts the European customers off, the pipeline structure of Western Siberia is very much orientated to Russia itself and then onwards to the European Union.
Russia's foreign minister has said Ukraine is showing more understanding over Moscow's position and that talks should continue. Speaking in Delhi, Sergei Lavrov also praised India for its neutral stance on the conflict. Russia is attempting to establish a ruble-to-rupee trading mechanism between the two countries. This would allow India to bypass international economic sanctions when buying Russian exports, notably oil and defence equipment.
Inflation across the Eurozone surged to 7.5% last month, hitting another record high. That's well above the European Central Bank's target of 2%. The biggest jump in consumer costs were in energy and food prices, which were going up before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The figures will increase pressure on the ECB to raise interest rates when it meets in 2 weeks' time.
Ford Motor Company is recalling 737,000 vehicles in the United States to fix oil leaks and a software glitch that could cause problems with braking. The recall affects recent models of the Ford Escape, Bronco, Maverick, Expedition and Lincoln Navigator. Dealers will have to replace parts causing the oil leak and update the brake control software.
Oil company ExxonMobil UK has temporarily shut 4 of its terminals after climate change activists blocked 10 sites in different locations. 13 people have been arrested after the protests, which were organised by Extinction Rebellion and another group called Just Stop Oil.
Camelot, the company that runs the UK's national lottery, is taking legal action after losing its licence. The firm has started legal proceeding against the Gambling Commission, which chose rival Allwyn as its preferred applicant for the lottery's next licence, beginning in 2024.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, how Hungary's election is being shaped by the war on its doorstep.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the 2nd year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China and the EU agree the war in Ukraine is threatening global security and the global economy. The two sides meet at a virtual China-EU summit.
Our other headlines, Moscow says Ukraine hit a fuel depot in Russia. Ukraine says it cannot confirm or deny those claims.
Russia keeps the gas flowing to Europe, despite a Moscow ultimatum to pay in rubles or be cut off.
Oil prices in the United States have fallen to under $100 a barrel following President Joe Biden's call for a record-breaking release of American petroleum reserves. The United States government also announced a fall in the unemployment rate to 3.6%. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, first of all, this fall in the unemployment rate, the jobs report was pretty strong, wasn't it?
Yes, arguably a little bit too strong, actually, because the thing about economics is you're always treading a very, very fine line, and whatever number you're presented with, there's always a downside to it, okay? And so this is true today. So we have clearly a very strong economy in America at the moment. Otherwise, we wouldn't be adding all these jobs. But other data suggests otherwise. Let me try to explain. So they put on 431,000 jobs in the month of March, not the 490,000 that had been expected, but still pretty good, and not the 750,000 that we saw in February. And it means that the U.S. economy has pretty much put on an average of 600,000 jobs every month for the last 6 months. Unemployment rate down to 3.6%, which is not as much as people have been hoping for. It overall means that in the first quarter, the economy here put on 1.7 million new jobs. And we're about 1 million jobs away from where we were now at the start of the pandemic in 2020. 112,000 leisure and hospitality jobs put on, professional and business services jobs. Retail was third in the pecking order. Wages are rising. A little bit of work to do there. I think they're up about 5%. Inflation's around 7%. You know that. Of course, workers' wages going up is very good for them, very good for us. Not so good for the Federal Reserve, which has to balance this inflation conundrum which is going on. Now, President Biden has just spoken in the last hour. He says that 7.9 million jobs have been added during the recovery. He says that this will help the supply chain issue, which, of course, is part of the inflation story. And he said he now has the type of economy that he wants to see, which is much more sort of broader range of people in jobs all over the country, something like that. Anyway, the point is here, they are now braced for a 50 basis point interest rate hike when the Federal Reserve next meets. That's going to be in very early May, and probably a 50 basis point hike at the meeting after that as well. So there's been a real change of tone here. We really know that there's a big interest rate hike coming really very, very soon to try and calm down inflation. And, you know, this follows strong comments from Jerome Powell, the chairman of the central bank, just a couple of weeks ago, when he came out and said basically the same thing. As a result of that, the yields are up, the prices are down. They're basically factoring in a slowdown, if not a recession, not now, but in 2023/2024. Markets are all down, NASDAQ, S&P 500. And just a final word, we did have our first negative quarter for 2 years this last 3 months. But on the brighter side, we're back to that conundrum again. On the brighter side, the month of March was the first positive month in 2022. So, you know, it's all a balance.
And a word about Joe Biden's US oil reserve release. We talked about that yesterday. But it seems to have worked, doesn't it?
On the face of it, yes, doesn't it? It does. We've got oil at $99 a barrel now, down 1%. But remember, it was $70 a barrel just back in January. This is partly because of what he's done, but also, as he said in his news conference just now, some of the allies have been doing the same thing, releasing their reserves as well. Many of the states around the country now are doing their own thing to try and help their local people by issuing vouchers and tax breaks and various handouts. Biden went after the oil majors yesterday, criticizing their profits and saying they must use the land and the permits they have now to start drilling without him giving them any more. Of course, the oil majors say, well, why? Why should we do that? You want to see us go out of business. Why should we spend all this money if you really ultimately in your party want to drive us out of business, which they think that he does? AAA has, and we're back here to this conundrum in economics again. The AAA, which is the motoring organization in America, says that, and you won't believe this, cheaper gasoline is likely to lead to higher demand, which will lead to, guess what? Higher prices. So, you know, you really can't win. Listen, before I go, we have breaking news here. Can I just tell you, Amazon workers at Staten Island in New York have voted to unionize. That's a huge story. Amazon really didn't want a union. They tried it in Alabama. It failed. They're going to try again very shortly. Now there will be a union in Staten Island, huge depot that Amazon has on one of the boroughs here in New York. That's a big story just breaking, and you have it first.
John, and we thank you for it, as always. Good to see you. Our correspondent, John Terrace in New York.
Hungarian voters go to the polls on Sunday, with populist Prime Minister Viktor Orban seeking a fourth term. Unsurprisingly, the Russia-Ukraine conflict has dominated much of the campaign. Our correspondent Trent Murray sent this report from Budapest.
Well, it is less than 48 hours to go until voters here in Hungary go to the polls. This Central European country of 10 million people faces a choice whether to re-elect Viktor Orban, the incumbent Prime Minister that leads the Fidesz conservative nationalist coalition, or whether to bring about some change, and that would be by electing Peter Márki-Zay, who leads the United for Hungary opposition group. Now, right now, Viktor Orban is in front in the polls by about 5 points. Many pollsters here expect that he will win, but the opposition is also working incredibly hard in these final hours of the campaign to shore up those undecided voters that do remain out there in the electorate. Now, this United for Hungary group is quite interesting because it's for the first time a coalition of 6 different parties, all very different. Some from the far right, some from the far left, even the Green Party is in there, but they believe that by coming together under one big tent, that gives them the best fighting chance to try and bring about change here. Now, as you might imagine, the conflict in Ukraine, just over the border from where I am, has dominated this campaign very heavily. Viktor Orban says that if Peter Márki-Zay is elected on Sunday, that he would drag Hungary into that war by trying to provide weapons to Kiev. That is an accusation that is refuted by the opposition here. Instead, they say Viktor Orban is a puppet of President Vladimir Putin. So this campaign has got quite negative at times, quite personal, but it is a very high-stakes campaign, a very high-stakes election, and both sides are going to work very, very hard, right down to the wire, to try and shore up a majority on the floor of the Hungarian parliament. Voters go to the polls on Sunday. Trent Murray, CGTN, Budapest.
The Serbian President, Aleksandar Vučić, is on course to win another 5-year term, according to the opinion polls ahead of Sunday's election. The populist is campaigning on a manifesto of peace and stability. Belgrade is under pressure from the West to choose between its traditional ties with Russia and its aspiration to join the European Union.
At least 8 miners have been killed and 20 injured after an explosion at a coal mine in Serbia. The blast caused the pit near the town of Aleksinac to collapse. An investigation is underway.
Police have lifted a curfew in Sri Lanka's largest city, Colombo, following violent protests over an economic crisis that's crippling the country. More than 50 people were arrested after demonstrators gathered outside President Rajapaksa's home. Cars were set on fire and police used tear gas and water cannon to disperse the crowds.
Former judge Sergio Moro has withdrawn his bid to become president of Brazil. His decision narrows the field in what's likely to be a highly polarised October election between far-right President Jair Bolsonaro and his leftist rival Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Moro made his name campaigning against corruption.
Energy prices in the UK are set to soar after the price cap on most bills was increased by over 50%.
Around 22 million households will be affected. It comes at a time when other bills are also set to go up. Our correspondent Naweed Jabarkil is here. Naweed.
Thanks, Robin. Millions of households in the UK will see their energy bills rise significantly from April 1st. It's because of a 54% increase in the energy price cap, which limits how much businesses can charge consumers. Because of higher gas prices on global markets, firms say they have to charge more. Many energy companies here in the UK have actually gone bust in recent months, unable to absorb those rising costs. Now, for consumers, it means 18 million households will see their bills go up by an average of around $900 a year. Another 4.5 million homes face even higher bills because of the fact that they're on prepayment meters. A home using an average amount of gas and electricity in Britain will now face an annual bill of almost $2,600. The government says it's doing all it can here in the UK to limit the rises and is dedicating around $12 billion to help people, particularly those on low incomes. But the situation could get worse. The price cap is reviewed every 6 months, and many experts think there could be another rise to come later this year in October. Adding to worries is the fact that the general cost of living is also on the up. Fuel prices are near record levels in the UK. Inflation is also at a 30-year high at more than 6%. That means general goods like food are costing more and interest rates are rising too, which will impact millions of people with mortgages and other repayments. But importantly, it's not just the UK feeling the heat. Living costs are rising across Europe and elsewhere in the world, partly because of global energy prices, as well as the war in Ukraine and the ongoing impact of the pandemic. It all means governments are having to respond. In France, for example, motorists will get a discount on fuel prices from today of around 20 US cents a litre to try and soften the blow. The long and short of it is across the continent, life is getting more expensive. And for millions of families, that's going to mean some tough decisions in the months ahead. Jamie, Robin.
Naweed, thank you very much. Well, let's pick up on that. All sectors across the UK have been hit by this energy crisis. Shoppers are already starting to see prices rise as farmers struggle with production costs.
Our correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
Tony Montalbano should be inspecting 30,000 square metres of ripe cucumbers, but the greenhouses on his farm in southeast England are empty. A cucumber should cost about 15 cents to produce, but it costs now at least twice that, so Tony didn't plant this spring.
So I thought by planting later I can reduce my gas prices. My product price hasn't changed, so again that's my reason why I've planted late, hoping that also gas prices come down. But yeah, prices are still very high. At the moment, this week, it's about 5 times more than what I would be paying last year.
No one can predict how bad the energy crisis will become, and across the UK, farmers are pulling back, reducing stock, planting later or not at all. Fertiliser has tripled in price. Last year, gas was about 30 cents a therm. Last week, it was about $3. Unlike in Spain or Morocco, UK farms have to heat their greenhouses. Pressure from supermarkets and shoppers has created a year-round demand.
These, albeit small businesses, are a strategically important part of our food supply because in season, the majority of produce that we buy through the retailers will come from UK farms. And what we've seen year on year for the past 5-10 years probably is a constant downward pressure on prices and on margins.
This weekend, artificial price caps will be removed from energy supplies and the market will find a new level. That means the peppers, aubergines, tomatoes or cucumbers normally grown in the UK over the summer may not happen.
Yes, disheartening that it's happening like this. Gas prices being so sky high, it's worrying times. You know, of all the years of us working hard to get to where we are, and then just 1 year it could just all finish there.
Shoppers here in Britain and further afield in Europe are likely to feel the pinch this summer in ways that few have ever experienced before in their lifetimes. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Well, as governments, not just in the UK, continue to face pressure to address those rising gas and oil prices, renewable power sources are becoming increasingly attractive as a way to pull the plug on fossil fuels.
The Agenda's Stephen Cole has been speaking to energy analyst Kingsmill Bond, who says the time has come for Europe to make the switch.
You know, this is a war, right? So in war, you do what you have to do, and then when peace comes, you change your policy. It's very, very similar, of course, to what happened in the 1970s, when we have the oil shock and a massive crisis, and then you get rationing and all kinds of damaging consequences. But then what did governments do is they put into place efficiency. They massively, at that stage, ramped up nuclear. Our equivalent, what we are going to do this time round, we will also massively ramp up efficiency, and we're going to increase the speed of deployment of solar and wind. And I want to make one further really significant point. There is this kind of false narrative that solar and wind are expensive. This is ridiculous. This stuff costs $50 or euros per megawatt hour. Fossil fuels is over 100 now, and actually, therefore, I would see this crisis as being very material to solve some long-standing issues that we and many others have been pointing out for a long time.
And the conversation about renewable energy continues on the agenda with Stephen this weekend.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Building Bridges. Our special series begins as we hear the story of two generations bringing China and the UK closer together.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came
tear
in.
gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated. Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Have you ever wondered how much a human life is worth?
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and considered whether aliens are staring back? Or if it's even possible to measure intelligence?
If that sounds like you, it's time to join the Answers Project with me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge.
We've recruited the best brains in the world, award-winning astrophysicists, giants of medical science, and former presidential advisors to help us tackle humanity's biggest questions.
Find the answers wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. We were reporting earlier that the 23rd China-EU summit, which has been taking place online, Whilst Russia's invasion of Ukraine dominated the agenda, the two also discussed their crucial trade ties.
China is the EU's biggest trading partner when it comes to the import of goods. In Spain, there's growing demand for China's green technology. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
Spain has made a major commitment to green energy for the next decade and beyond. It's ambitious, but the current government has pledged to double their renewable output to over 40% of their energy mix by 2030. Plants like this one in Orgaz, about an hour outside of the Spanish capital, will certainly play their part. The photovoltaics, or PV industry, more commonly known as solar energy, is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. The need for alternatives to fossil fuels and better energy security has never been greater.
Spain has great potential for solar energy. Our population density is relatively low, and we have a large area of landmass with a good electric infrastructure that keeps improving. Everything points to the same conclusion, that solar energy is our future, and if not, then it will certainly be very high up on our list.
Now, at full capacity, this place can power up to 2,000 homes day in and day out. Now, changes in solar technology have meant that panels like these are lighter and more efficient than their predecessors, like those which were designed around 10 years ago. So that means more electricity being produced at a cheaper cost and with zero emissions. This plant is run by Trina Solar from China. They've opened plants like this across Europe as the continent seeks to expand its renewable sector. Trina have won numerous awards for efficiency and see themselves amongst the market leaders. They do face stiff competition, however, as technology advances.
Of course, there's huge competition between companies like in any other sector. It's actually positive in our side because it pushes companies to continue to improve in the development of this technology, and that has to be a good thing.
Plants like this one in Toledo are set to become more commonplace across the Iberian Peninsula. The economic benefits of solar power are now being matched by the political will to switch to green energy in countries across Europe. There's real momentum to reduce dependency on imported fossil fuels, changes that could hopefully bring more stability to the energy market. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Toledo.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of full diplomatic ties between China and the UK. In the past half a century, many people have worked to bring the two countries closer together.
CGTN has produced a special series of programmes, and today we meet the Perry family, who've opened up trade, cultural and sports exchanges between the two countries.
70 years ago, a small group of British businessmen travelled to China. They became known as the Icebreakers. Now meet the bridge builders, the individuals continuing the icebreaker spirit to open up our world.
I'm Stephen Perry and I'm chairman of London Export Corporation and chairman of the 48 Group Club. My father's first visit to China was 1953, and in 1951-52 he met with Zhou Enlai's private secretary, personal emissary, who came to London to ask people in Cambridge for advice on somebody who could reopen trade with China. And for a man who'd never really been out of the East End of London, it was an incredible experience and an incredible opportunity. The original icebreaker mission, it was people from lots of different ranges of life and people from lots of businesses who wanted to open up or restart their businesses with China. There were 19 of them, and they signed an agreement, and it was all carried out. I joined right after I was president of my students' union, and I went to Beijing in 1972, 50 years ago now, and I was part of the group that sold the first commodities from America to China. And being around the Nixon mission and that background made me feel a part of history. And soon after that, I went to work in America to build trade between America and China. And it was just fascinating learning about America and learning about China and finding ways to bring the two countries together in trade. It was ice-breaking, but it was, in a sense, it was very easy because it was so enjoyable. I met such interesting people. What I decided was my main mission, to understand China and how it worked. And that's been a long journey. It's been 20, 30 years. I had no idea in 1978 the Chinese were going to transform agriculture and mechanize it and move 800 million people off the land into towns and cities and build the biggest export industry in the world. I think I probably irritate people because I say to them, you don't understand what these people are like. They have the best grasp of what it is they want to do, and it's based in reality, not in fantasy. And then they go out and they do it, and they test it, and they change, and they alter. But they're absolutely committed to being the most advanced, modernized economy by 2049. People like us said, you can't join the WTO, your markets will be taken over by foreigners. And they would smile and say, thank you for telling us. But they did. So with the WTO entry, everybody thought it would be a real difficult time for China. Actually, China drove straight into the middle of it and became the largest exporting nation. If you're not trying to achieve win-win, then you're going to have trouble in China. And I say to Chinese who come out of China looking to win, you won't succeed. Unless you can work out how to work with the foreigner, you're going to find it very difficult. It is a different concept of business. Most businesses are operating on the basis of win. But China has a much better understanding of what win-win means. It's not just a phrase, it's a reality of something that will be sustained. The bridge building project, the CGTN, is giving us a great deal of opportunity to reflect upon. It is only by this type of thinking that we're going to find out what works. If we all knew what would work, we would all do it. But there has to be exploration, and we have to give people their head in order to try different things. You know, the Chinese have a view that the world can only work if the countries of the world work together, and that the days of empires are past. And they genuinely believe that if they try to be an empire, they will fail. If we understand that China is going to be the trendsetter of the next 20 or 30 years, that is the country which we need to get alongside and to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. It'll transform the world.
The headlines again. China and the EU agree the war in Ukraine is threatening global security and the global economy. The two sides meet at a virtual China-EU summit.
Moscow says Ukraine hit a fuel depot in Russia. Ukraine says it cannot confirm or deny those claims.
And Russia keeps the gas flowing to Europe despite a Moscow ultimatum to pay in rubles or be cut off.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.